You're listening to WCAT Radio, your home for authentic Catholic programming.
All right. So here's your bottom line up front for Fire Away episode 61. The Miracle of Fatima hit the Catholic headlines recently, and not necessarily in a good way. Oh, you didn't know? Then you better call somebody. And the good news is that somebody is Kevin Symonds, and you won't want to miss this episode, so tune in.
What is your profession?
Saddle up. Lock and load.
Nomine Patri et Filii, Spiritus Sancti.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome. You're listening to Fire Away with Carlos Bersabe, brought to you by Catholic Ammo, En Route Books and Media, and WCAT Radio, where we're locked, loaded, and ready for battle with today's hot topics. Howdy, everybody. This is your host, Carlos Bersabe. You're listening to episode 61 of Fire Away. And if you haven't already done so, please subscribe via iTunes or whatever podcast platform you are using and give us a great rating and review. It is truly appreciated and helps a lot. So let's do a quick recap. On the last episode, I had the privilege, nay, I say, the honor of having on Father Stephen Gadberry, where we talked about everything manly and evangelization. So if you haven't already done so or gotten a chance to listen to that episode, go ahead and give it a go. But you'll want to hold off on that until you've listened to this episode, because today we are going to talk about some controversy regarding the Miracle of Fatima. So what do you get when you add the Miracle of Fatima to something Archbishop Vigano said? Bam! A hot topic, which brings us to our guest, Kevin Symonds, who I consider my go-to guy on all matters Fatima. Kevin was born and raised in Massachusetts. In 2003, he received a bachelor's in theological studies from Franciscan University of Steubenville, Ohio, with an emphasis on the classical languages. 3 years later, he obtained his master's degree in theological studies from Franciscan University. Kevin lives in Michigan and teaches theology. He specializes in Catholic Church's theology of private revelation and has written books and numerous articles on print and on the internet. He is also a member of the Mariological Society of America. So when you get a chance, check him out at kevinsymonds.com. That's KevinSymonds.com. But before we go any further, let's bow our heads in an opening prayer. Kevin, if you would.
In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Pour forth, we beseech thee, O Lord, thy grace into our hearts, that we, to whom the incarnation of Christ thy Son was made known by the message of an angel, may by his passion and cross we be brought to the glory of his resurrection, through the same Christ our Lord. Amen. Our Lady of Fatima, pray for us. All the holy angels and saints,
pray for us.
In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen. Kevin, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. It's really good to be here.
Oh, man, and I am so excited. This is an interesting topic for me. You can hear that crowd cheering. They are excited as well. And so, man, I tell you, Fatima, that is a good topic right there. But seeing as it's your first time on the show, before we delve into the meaty goodness of this topic, why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Before I do that, though, I would normally say this for way towards the end, if not even post-production, but I have to ask, at the opening intro with the Latin, Nomine Patris Filii, etc., was that taken from the Boondock Saints?
Yes, it was.
I thought so. I was like, wait a minute, that sounds like from the Boondock Saints. Do not ask me why I know that.
No, it's okay. Yeah, I mean, I like to use popular culture, and that was prior to my reversion coming back, and I just thought that was such an interesting way, kind of like with the 300. What is your profession? I love how sometimes pop culture can actually aid us in our spiritual journeys if we use it right. And so I figured, this is just a little bit of me pouring out into the show.
I see. Yes, I saw the first one, I think, in large parts, if not the whole thing, way back in the day, actually when I was in college. And I just, as shepherds we shall be, for thee, my Lord, today. And that one song, The Blood of Crew Lane, I think is how you say it. I love that song. It's great. But anyway, yeah. So that's a little bit like your extra bio. There you go. So you kind of mentioned a little bit, but as you mentioned, I was born in the greater Boston area. I lived there for most of my young life. In 1999, went to college and obtained my bachelor's degree in theology, as well as an emphasis in the classical languages, Greek and Latin, at the same time. 3 years later, the master's degree. Currently working out in Michigan. I work for a Catholic apostolate, and all views expressed herein are my own. They are not necessarily reflective of my diocese or my workplace. Just want to be clear about that. And I've done a lot of writing over the years. I kind of took a liking to that early, roughly. It goes back to about my bachelor's degree time, early 2000s or so. And I've always had a vested interest in the Church's theology of private revelation for various reasons over the years. And I just kind of stuck with that in addition to my teaching responsibilities or my present work with the apostolate here. So, and Fatima has always been near and dear to my heart ever since I became Catholic about 1997. So this is a good topic for us to get into, and I'd be happy to elaborate on any further information with me or Fatima.
Boy, howdy, it is such a great topic. So why don't you give us what is the situation?
Okay, well, the present news is that Archbishop Carlo Maria Vigano, the former papal nuncio to the United States, has made some statements regarding Fatima, and that's kind of what some of the new interest is. My phone and my emails, Facebook, whatever, they've all been blowing up. Going, what's going on here? So, kind of the reason why this is big news is because it's Vigano. And he's a former high-ranking Vatican official, papal nuncio. Those are, pretty serious people. They're involved in Vatican diplomacy. So he made some statements regarding Fatima that are very, very, involve some very controversial material. And I think it's good before we kind of launch into that proper to just give a little bit of background first, if that's all right.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Yeah. Well, long story short, in 1917, between May and October of that year, the Virgin Mary appeared to 3 children, Lucia dos Santos and Francisco and Jacinta Marto. Francisco and Jacinta were cousins to Lucia, and of course vice versa. Well, between those months, Our Lady had appeared to them and had communicated information to them, as well as had requested if they would be willing to offer themselves to God, for the conversion of sinners and to make reparation for the offenses made against God. And in July of that year, July 13th, 1917, the Virgin Mary communicated what is known as the Secret of Fatima to the children. The secret was information over the course of what was designated as 3 parts. The first part was a vision of hell. The second was a devotion and some prophecies regarding the Immaculate Heart of Mary and prophecies regarding the Church and the world. And then the third part was a vision that entailed the Pope and bishops and cardinals and religious, like monks and nuns it is, and then lay people going towards a cross, and they're being martyred. Well, what's the controversy here? Well, the secret was supposed to be just that, a secret. Our Lady had commanded Sister Lucia. Lucia later became a nun in life. And then she told them to keep this quiet, not to tell anybody. Only Francisco could know because he could see Our Lady but not hear her. And Our Lady had given permission for the secret in all 3 parts to be communicated to Francisco privately. I have explanations and all that. Because again, he could see but not hear. So what happened was Lucia kept that secret for many, many years. And then in the 1930s, early 1940s roughly, she started to reveal the secret. So by the end of, I think it was 1941, she had written down the first 2 parts that I mentioned. But the third part she kept hidden because she didn't feel as though she had the permission from heaven. Well, then what happened was she became very sick, and people were imploring the Bishop of Leiria, which has jurisdiction over Fatima there in Portugal. He had they were imploring him, don't let her go to her grave, without revealing the third part of the secret. So he was reluctant, but then eventually he ordered her to write it down. Well, poor Sister Lucia, she tried to write it down, but she was confused. Our Lady had told her, don't tell this to anybody, and she didn't feel as though she had the permission from heaven to write it down. But to her, a command from the bishop was as if it was from God himself.
Right.
So it was so serious that when she literally would take pen to try to, on paper, to try to write down, she just could not move her hand whatsoever. But then she says in one of her writings that, if I put a pen in hand and write about anything else, she just keeps on going. Well, eventually what happened was in January 1944, the Virgin Mary appeared to her and gave her the permission to write it down. And that was written down on January 3rd, 1944. It was sealed in an envelope. Later we knew it was two for security reasons. And it was communicated 6 months later in June, I think, 6 months later in June to the titular Bishop of Gursa, who then gave it to the Bishop of Leiria, Fatima. And the secret remained under lock and key, and it was this big, huge thing. Oh, what was it? People wanted, it's like what Aristotle said at the beginning of the metaphysics. All humans by nature desire to know. Well, people wanted to know what was the third part of the secret. And she had written on the envelope that this was not to be opened until 1940, 1960. But what happened was, when the time came, and in 1960, it was not revealed. Well, first, again, the document went, after it was written, it went to the Bishop of Leiria, as I said, and it stayed in the Episcopal archives of the diocese. And in 1957, by 1957, the diocese had received an order from the Vatican for copies of all of Sister Lucia's manuscripts. Mind you, the word is copies, not originals.
Right.
That's a very key point. The best information that we have right at this time is that the Vatican ordered or requested copies to be sent. But this is 1956, 1957, roughly, that we're talking about, and the Bishop of Leiria didn't want to mess with heaven's secrets, as he said, and so he decided to send the whole document unopened with the containing the third part of the secret to the Vatican, along with the other materials. Well, people were begging him, please, 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 open it up, make a copy. This is our last chance. If you send the original, we lose control over this. And the bishop said, no. This is heaven's secrets, and not far be it. Basically, he was saying it's above my pay grade. He just didn't want to mess with it. Now, of course, I'm speaking, conversationally. Those are not his literal words, but that was the essential point that he was driving at. He had a certain respect, if not, maybe dare I say, even a slight dislike for meddling in heaven's affairs,
Right.
So what happened was the assistant bishop to Leiria, João Pereira Venancio, he was tasked to bring the document down to Lisbon in Portugal, where the papal nuncio resided. So on his way there, he was looked up to the light. He held the document up to the light, because it was sealed in another envelope with the bishop's handwriting and seal on it. And so Venancio looked it up to the light, and all this stuff, and to try to get some information about it. I'll have more to say on that a little bit later. And then he gave it to the nuncio, or the nunciature, I should say, where the nuncio lived, in early February, early March of 1957. Then the Bishop of Leiria died in late 57, and Venancio succeeded him. And then Pius XII died in 1958, I think it was in October of that year. Pope John the 23rd gets elected Pope. And in August of 1959, he's at his summer residence in Castel Gandolfo, and he requested that the third part of the secret be brought to him. Well, there's a lot of controversy that remains around all this stuff, but the history behind it. But long story short, the Pope opened it up, read it, called in as they say in Italian, a minutante, kind of like a transcriptionist or like a minor secretary from the Vatican Secretary of State, Monsignore Jose Tavares, and who from Portugal, and he translated it into Italian because the Pope wanted to make sure of the nuances of the language. Well, Tavares went on to become the Bishop of Massal there in the Orient later on, shortly thereafter, actually. There's only one known picture of him on the internet that I've been able to find. Well, they open it up, and John the 23rd, gets this consultation on it. He confides in a couple of trusted confidants, one of whom was his personal secretary, then Monsignore Loris Capovilla, later Cardinal Capovilla. And they ultimately decide John the 23rd makes the decision. He says that, the document was sealed back up, and for a time it was left in the papal. There was a desk in John the 23rd's office, in his private offices there in the papal apartments. Maybe it was his bedroom. I don't remember precisely, but that's right. And the desk was called Barbarigo, named after I think it was a saint that had used that desk. And the text throughout the rest of John's pontificate was in a drawer of that desk. John the 23rd dies. Oh, and by the way, I should back up and say, now we're in 1960. People are anticipating this. There was a big lead up that this was supposed to be the year of its publication. Well, what happened was it wasn't published, and everybody started speculating. And in February, I think it's the 6th or the 8th of that year, if I remember correctly, an anonymous article was published in European media that was written by, like I said, somebody who worked for United Press International, but there was no name attached. And it basically said, this document is going to be sealed forever. Now, there's been some miscommunication, not miscommunications, misconceptions, pardon me, about this article. Some people have said it issued directly from John the 23rd. If I may jump into that, actually, that's one of the recent things that Vigano had said in his recent interview. We'll jump back into that a little bit later. But either which way, it was very much apparent now this text was not going to be published. And that created a firestorm of controversy. People want, again, all human beings by nature desire to know. And they were being held in the dark. And that drove a lot of people nuts. So speculations for the next 40 years came up. And but the Holy See was adamant that this text was not going to be published. But this, of course, Lucia is still alive, but she was not talking to anybody because she had she wanted to remain hidden life. She was a Carmelite nun. She just wanted to live a simple religious life. And so she requested that people stop coming to see her. She herself requested that. And that's important because people have claimed over the years as part of these speculations that she was silenced. She was banned by the Vatican because the Vatican II church was in the ascendancy, and she represented old Vatican II, prior to Vatican II stuff, I should say. Absolute nonsense, absolute bunk, and for reasons that I'll get into a little bit later. So now what happens is we're at the end of the 20th century. It's May 2000. John Paul II is in Fatima for the beatification of Francisco and Jacinta Marto, who had died in 1919 and 1920, between those 2 years. And the Pope makes it known through his Secretary of State, Angelo Cardinal Sodano, that the third part of the secret was going to be revealed. And then he gave like a basic summary of what its contents were, which is essentially what I had said earlier. So I won't describe it here in great depth. So now, of course, everybody's like, yay, we're finally going to know what it says, And groups that were very interested in this, and I will say them by name. Most notably, chief among them in the English-speaking world would be Father Nicholas Gruner and his organization called the Fatima Center. They were very, very keen to know what this was going to be all about. In the French-speaking world, there was another organization, Le Contre-Réforme Catholique, the Counter-Catholic Reform, that was founded by the Abbé Georges de Nantes. I think he died around 2009, I think, somewhere in 2011, somewhere in that rough area of time. So these organizations were very, very interested to know what this text said. But unfortunately, they were very controversial in their own right between these two organizations. And so they had put a lot of literature out there that caused various conclusions to take place or to happen. And some of those conclusions, and I've said this for some time now, some of those conclusions were very intriguing and very interesting. And later documentation would kind of verify some of that. How they argued or how far they took the argument, that's another matter. So they were right about some things, I say, but I don't think they were right about everything. But those are finer issues. We don't have to get into that right now. But I'm just being very technical. So what happens is June 26, 2000, the Vatican holds a press conference. I think it lasted about an hour and a half, give or take. Present were Joseph Cardinal Ratzinger, prefect for the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, his secretary, Archbishop Tarcisio Bertone, later Cardinal Bertone, Secretary of State, and then the papal spokesman, Dr. Joaquin Navarro-Valls. Well, what happens is they had published a booklet called, in English, The Message of Fatima, the Messaggio di Fatima in Italian, and they reproduced the text of the third part of the secret. They transcribed it. They even fixed some grammatical errors there. I still don't know why they did this. I have a hypothesis, but they actually took out a whole phrase. They excised a whole phrase. I have no idea why they did that. I only have speculation, which of course is not proof.
Right.
But I think it's well-founded speculation. Anyway, so what happens is the booklet gets published. There's two parts to this conference. The first part were what they call interventions, or like miniature speeches from Bertone and Ratzinger, contextualizing this document, and then they had a Q&A with the assembled journalists immediately thereafter. Well, the Vatican had published the interventions, but not the Q&A. And so a lot of what we knew from that Q&A session was second, third, fourth, fifth, however many, down the telephone line of game, if we're going to play the game of telephone, it was not direct evidence. Well, that led to some problems, unfortunately, because the question is, was this person's information right? Was their interpretation of what was said in the Q&A correct? So there were some glaring questions there. And I'm setting you up because there's something, I'll return to that later. Well, when the text was presented, it showed what I said earlier, and the Pope, the bishops, and the priests, and the men and women religious, the lay people of all ranks, going towards this cross. And they're all being shot at and martyred, and angels are coming. Our Lady's Immaculate Heart is there, and she's deflecting this angel with a fiery sword, saying penance, penance, penance. For the angel saying that. So there's all different kinds of things going on here, but and the Vatican had its interpretation of it. Well, unfortunately, one of those organizations, Father Gruner's group, they got very vocal in denouncing, if I may use that word, maybe it's just too strong of a word, but they were decrying, that's probably the better word, the Vatican's interpretation of the third part of the secret. The Vatican had said that it referred to the martyrs of the 20th century, and they referred to John Paul II's assassination attempt on his life, that is, it from that Turkish gunman, May 13th, 1981. But this is one of the sticking points. People said that the Vatican had said that the assassination attempt was the fulfillment of the third part of the Secret of Fatima, and the shooting of the Pope that's in the vision. That's not what they said. That's not what Ratzinger said, like, at all, or Bertone. What they said was this vision, they said, represents a whole century of the martyrs, and the figure of the Pope represents all of the popes of the 20th century. And so they talked about this evil that was taking place throughout the whole century. And then, I think it was Ratzinger says, it culminato in Italian, it culminated, all this evil, he said, culminated in the assassination of John Paul II. Attempt, that is. Do you see the difference there?
Yeah, I think so.
What's the difference in your own words?
So it's more holistic rather than particular, or I don't know if it's holistic is the right word. It's a more general application rather than particular. Is that what your meaning on that one?
Basically, yes. There was a broader context of holistic, as opposed to they didn't just narrow in and say, "What? No, John Paul II's assassination attempt was an attempt on his life, fulfilled it." That's not what they said.
Right.
But we didn't know this until 2017. Why? Because I published a book with En Route Books and Media on the third part of The Secret of Fatima. A fellow scholar and researcher on Fatima had sent me a copy of the video of the full press conference, both parts, the interventions and the Q&A. Long story short, I sent the file off to a professional transcription transcribing company. They transcribed the Italian, and then I had it translated into English and published this in my book. So now people actually have the text for themselves, and they can read and say, wait a minute, that's not what the Vatican said at all, So, but there were finer nuances there that unfortunately the media, when they report, I think one was the Washington Press or the Washington something, they essentially, in my humble opinion, and I say this with all due respect and no malice in my heart, they misunderstood what Ratzinger and Bertone had said. They misreported it. But that misreporting, I think, got to some of these people, especially like in the Father Gruner organization, who quoted that this Washington Post or Press Herald, whatever the thing was, they quoted this in some of their writings, and they used that as a foundational text, dare I say. And I was just like, that was a mistake. The journalist made a mistake because they weren't paying attention, it looks like, and then that misled other people. So again, innocent mistake, right. But at the same time, I do still hold people accountable privately, because if you're going to make many accusations against the church and her leaders, you better make sure that your T's are crossed and your I's are dotted, because something as simple as this could prove to be your undoing. So I do hold people to standards, but I understand that it was an innocent mistake. I don't think it certainly wasn't done maliciously. I don't think, at least on the part of like Father Gruner and his people, I don't think that was the case at all. That there was malice. So, but anyway, what happens is now this has gone out there in 2000, and now the document's on the Vatican's website. It's published in a little booklet that you can get through like second, third hand shops now online. But and people just, they in the words of one of Father Gruner's associates, Christopher Ferrara, they basically tore that book apart, and they scrutinized every little bit of it, and they were commenting left and right and cranking out all this literature, and it was influencing a lot of people here in the United States. Well, what happened was things kind of spearheaded. There was one early book called The Devil's Final Battle, published by Father Paul Kramer. But yet, and I can now say this because this was private knowledge that I had learned, but it was private. I couldn't reveal it, but I can reveal it now. The book wasn't written by him.
Oh.
No, it was actually organized and edited by Father Gruner himself. I learned that from one of Father Gruner's associates who works for the Fatima Center. I learned that a few years back, but I was not able to say anything until within the past year or two, Father Kramer himself made a comment publicly online in which he revealed the fact. So now I'm able to say this publicly without, any issue. So yes, again, it was Gruner, not Kramer, that wrote this book called The Devil's Final Battle, and it was translated into any number of languages. I know Italian, I think, was one of them. And so information is getting spread and disseminated, and a certain interpretation goes with this literature, and it's influencing a lot of people. Well, 2005, John Paul II dies. Benedict XVI is elected, Cardinal Ratzinger. And an Italian journalist named Antonio Socci, who was friends with people at the Vatican, Bertone included, who was now the Cardinal Secretary of State under Benedict XVI. Pardon me. Well, Socci starts reading this literature, and he read something from another reputable Italian journalist, Vittorio Messori, and Socci's just like, okay, you know what? I'm going to look up this stuff myself. All these controversies with Fatima, the third part of the secret, right? Well, as Socci is researching, he starts coming to the conclusion, wait a minute, there's more merit to these arguments by Father Gruner and others than I thought. And then he interviews, or obtains, I should say, some works from an Italian researcher named Soledeo Paolini, who had spoken to John the 23rd's still living private secretary, who I mentioned earlier, Monsignor Loris Capovilla. Capovilla was still living at the time. And Paolini had interviewed him and had spoken with him and obtained some information that Antonio Socci found out about and published in 2006, I believe it was, in a book called Il Quarto Segreto di Fatima, the Fourth Secret of Fatima, in which allegedly John the 23rd's private secretary says that there was in fact another text, or he kind of alludes to this, whether there was something's going on, like something he's hinting, making allusions, and stuff like that, if not direct in some places. Well, of course, this book gets published, and it sets off a veritable firestorm in Italian media, which of course leaks over into English literature through Father Gruner's organization, Fatima Center. And I think I mentioned earlier, Christopher Ferrara, who was one of Gruner's associates. He speaks Italian fluently. He himself is Sicilian. He's a Sicilian Italian. And so he starts translating Socci's book into English, which has now been published, I think, for about, 11, 12 years or so now. I have copies of it here in my office. So now the book was published by Loretto Publications in Fitzwilliam, New Hampshire. And so now it's taken off even more. Now it's got this 3 years later, the firestorm continues in the English-speaking language now. And in the meantime, Cardinal Bertone had decided, all right, you know what? I've had enough of this. So he publishes his own book, L'ultima veggente di Fatima, the last visionary or seer of Fatima.
Okay. And
he basically, it's a conversation with an Italian journalist. Oh my goodness, I'm drawing a blank on his name. Giuseppe Di Carli. And they're talking about Fatima amongst other topics. And in it, Bertone makes some very interesting statements. He even calls out Gruner by name at one point, if I remember correctly, and discusses him by name. And Bertone's basic point is there is no fourth secret. He's like, one of the strongest points that he makes in the book, in my opinion, is when he says, there is no second text. He says, the records in our archives don't indicate that, and they can't be tampered with because all of us at the Vatican know what happens when you tamper with this. You're not supposed to do that, Well, various things were said, various gaffes were made with Bertone, and I say this with all due respect to His Eminence. Let me say that flat out. I'm not saying this to criticize him. I'm saying this because it is the fact. He also gives an interview on a very popular Italian show called Porta a Porta with Bruno Vespa and some panelists, including a former Italian senator who knew personally Cardinal Alfredo Ottaviani, the former prefect for the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, who knew the third part of the secret of Fatima and had made statements about it. So Senator, I think Andreotti, I think was his name, knew Ottaviani personally. And so that was one of the reasons why he was on the panel, I think. So they talk about this, et cetera, and then Bertone, he's present but on camera. He then pulls out Sister Lucia's envelope on camera. And he says, he pulls it out and he shows it people. He turns it forwards and backwards so everybody could see it. You know, it was one sheet of paper that Sister had folded into rectangles, and it formed like little blocks that you could write in, and she wrote in those blocks. And that was partly in part because of an answer. There was one controversy that had arisen, and Bertone showing it on camera kind of addressed that question. And then right there, it's even on the envelopes, the Sister Lucia's handwritten note about the whole, about the note of 1960. And the Portuguese was Caso Aberto a 1960. It can only be opened in 1960. Well, did Our Lady say that, or was that Sister Lucia? That was one of the big questions at the time. Bertone had interviewed Sister Lucia, and she said to him, she said, Our Lady didn't give me the date of 1960. She said, I put that on the envelope. Oh. Well, that's very perplexing to a lot of people because it's right there on the envelope. Per ordem expressa de Nossa Senhora, by the express order of Our Lady. Misspelled, by the way, she misspelled it. But it's very, very clear in the Portuguese. She said it very clear, by the express order of Our Lady. So Bertone asks her, did Our Lady give this order or not? And according to him, she said to him, no, I was the one who put that on the envelope. It came from me, not Our Lady. So that raises the question. We have a contradiction here. How do we resolve this? In chapter 4 of my book, I attempt to offer some perspective on this, which that's another story for another time. Or maybe later in the podcast, who knows. But so long story short, what happens is these things keep coming up, and there's contradiction after contradiction. Something's not making sense. As I mentioned the gentleman, Christopher Ferrara, earlier, he is a lawyer by profession, and he does a lot of good work, as I understand it, with pro-life causes. And God bless him for that. We need more lawyers like that. As I said in an interview in 2017, the drawback to that is that he thinks more like a lawyer as opposed to a theologian. That's not an insult. Let me be very clear, because he crucified me for this in the public forum. That was not necessarily a negative criticism. It was a criticism, but more along the lines of an observation. I didn't mean that as to strike blood, to cut, to draw blood. I didn't mean it that way. Unfortunately, I got the impression that he took it that way. But that's not how it was intended. So, if it was, maybe I could have phrased it better. I apologize if I could have phrased it better than didn't. But it was not intended to be, to draw blood. It was just a simple observation. Because when you know how to think like a theologian, you can start to read the church's documents a lot differently and in proper context, because the church comes from theology in the sense that, when she's writing, theology informs these writings. She's not necessarily always thinking in legal terms. And so there's a drawback. You have to be careful. You have to temper your understanding of the documents. And so Mr. Ferrara and I debated, at a conference in 2017, October the 13th, that was a Friday that year. We debated for about an hour on the question of the third part of the Secret of Fatima. Well, so all this stuff is going on, right? I mean, we're kind of giving a lot here, but
no, it's okay. Keep on going.
But then there was a big game changer in October 2013. The Sister Lucia, as I mentioned, was a Carmelite nun, and she lived in the Carmel of Saint Teresa in Coimbra, Portugal. But when she died in February 13th, 2005, her sisters in religion were still very much living. And when Sister died, her documents passed to the Carmel. And they now have a museum, the Museo, I think it is Museo de Irma Lucia, in which they have on display various artifacts from her life, including some of her letters. As I understand it, there's about 11,000 letters. Just real quick aside, when the Sanctuary of Fatima, when the people in the archives, when they told me that fact, I nearly choked. I was in the archives and they showed me a bookshelf and they said, "Mr. Symonds, do you see all the books on this bookshelf?" I said, "Yes." And they said, "Well, we would need more bookshelves to house all the books with the letters, for all the letters that she wrote, just the letters, mind you." I said, "Are you serious?" They're like, "Yeah, she when she died, she left about 11,000 letters behind." I was like, "Oh my goodness." Yeah, I was like, whew. And then there are pictures of the documents that were forwarded to Rome with the red seals on them. You can find those on the internet as part of the beatification process. So, long story short, again, what happens is these documents pass to the Carmel, and her sisters start finding out more about her through her own writings. She left behind her private journal, O Meo Camino, or my Way or My Pathway. And the sisters said, why don't we write a biography based upon the published and some of the non-published writings? Well, whoever came up with that idea, may God bless them abundantly, because they eventually published this book in Portuguese in October, I think it was the 6th, 4th or 6th of 2013. And that book threw a bomb at this debate. Not only did it introduce us more deeply to the person of Sister Lucia and give us clues on how to understand her writings, which was extremely important, but they also revealed to the world for the first time what Our Lady said in that January 1944 apparition that I mentioned several minutes ago, wherein she gave Sister Lucia the permission to write down the third part of the secret. Before the publication of this biography, we knew that Our Lady had appeared to Sister and had given permission, but that's all we knew. The Carmelites, however, published Sister Lucia's own account. They transcribed it, and they also took a photo of the page of Sister's diary, her journal, and they reproduced it in the book. So we actually had a picture of the page wherein Sister Lucia's own handwriting is with this information. And Our Lady said to her, and I'm going to grab the book just so I'm accurate here to what I'm talking about. Our Lady had said to Lucia, pull it up here. I've got the Portuguese, and I've also got the English. The English translation, unfortunately, was not the best, and that was a problem later on. But Our Lady said to her, section 3, it's Our Lady permits that Lucia write the secret and gives to her new lights. That's a literal translation. Our Lady said to her, forgive my pronunciation of the Portuguese, but it's that now temas, quis Deus prova a tua obediencia, fe e humildade, esta in paz, et escreve o que te mandam, and this is the key phrase, now porem o que te he dado entender do seu significado. She said, do not fear. God wished to test or to prove your obedience, faith, and humility. Be in peace and write that which they command you, but not that which is given to you to understand of its meaning.
Okay.
That is huge. Why is this a big deal? Because when the text was published in the year 2000, It was a description of a vision. There was no interpretation. And that was one of the things that Father Gruner and his associates were talking about. They're saying, well, wait a minute, this makes no sense. Why is there a vision and no interpretation? When the children saw hell, Our Lady showed them hell, but then clearly said, you have seen hell where the souls of poor sinners go. So they're like, what gives? That's a good question. But this is one of those areas where they took the argument too far. They then came up with this idea that the Vatican was hiding a second text, the so-called fourth secret that Antonio Socci popularized, right, that I mentioned earlier.
Uh-huh.
But now we know that that's not the case, because Our Lady said, now porem, te he dado entender su significado, but not that which is given to you to understand of its meaning, significado, or its interpretation is another translation you can use for that. So, in other words, how can the Vatican be covering up a second text with the alleged words of the vision, words of the Virgin, explaining the vision of the third part of the secret, if Our Lady, the Virgin Mary, the Queen of Heaven, the Mary Seat of Wisdom herself, ordered no such text to be written? See what I'm saying?
I do, but that kind of brings us back to the topic for today.
Yes.
Because there are some very, very crazy things, I suppose, if what Archbishop Vigano is saying. And I'd like for you to go into that a little bit more.
Oh, yes. Actually, this is the perfect segue time, because what we talked about kind of jumps right into that.
Right.
What happened was on April 21st, Archbishop Vigano had given an interview with a Portuguese publication called Dies Irae, which is Latin for Day of Wrath. And I think it was like April 21st, I think what it was. Yeah. And he, I don't know if the original language was Portuguese or Italian, but an Italian text, a Portuguese text, and an English translation are available on the internet, and I have all three up here. I got them in a Microsoft Word document, parallel to each other. Well, in the first section of the interview, Archbishop Vigano is asked about Fatima in relation to the present plague with COVID-19, and the Pope, the Holy Father, Pope Francis, having that extraordinary day with the being alone in St. Peter's Square during the Holy Hour there with the Blessed Sacrament and that beautiful opportunity for that plenary indulgence. They're drawing upon this imagery and they're asking him about it. And they ask him specifically. There are many reactions to the way that the Pope conducted that moment, one of which tried to associate the solitary presence of Francis with the message of Fatima, i.e. the third secret. Then he was asked, "Lei è d'accordo? Do you agree?" And he, gives a little bit of a greeting to the Portuguese and, encourages them. But then this is when he starts going off the reservation. But before I get into that really quick, I just want to say he doesn't cite, this is the major criticism that I see. Vigano does not say where he's getting his information from. Because he is a former papal nuncio, worked for the Vatican, a lot of people I've noticed are presuming that the information that he presents in this interview is material that he learned during his time as a Vatican diplomat. But Vigano himself doesn't say that. In fact, he actually kind of indicates the opposite. So what he says is, he says the third part of the message that Our Lady entrusted to the shepherd children of Fatima, that's fine. But then what the next is to deliver to the Holy Father. That's not what Our Lady said. He's wrong, flat out. She never said, tell this to the Holy Father. She never said that. As a matter of fact, there's evidence to the contrary. Remember earlier I mentioned that the third part of the secret was in Portugal, then it went to Rome?
Sure, yeah.
We actually have it. It's published. There's a questionnaire that Sister Lucia herself was given. I have it. I have the original Portuguese. She said, she was asked, what did you think of this? And she said, actually, I was quite surprised. She said she had no idea that was going to happen. So there you go. That's mistake number one. Vigano continues, to deliver to the Holy Father remains secret to this day. Now that's where we're kind of, depending upon, he could be right here, but he also could be wrong depending upon how he argues it. Remember, Our Lady commanded that the interpretation not be given.
Right.
So it does technically remains secret, but for what reason? You have to read the rest of what Vigano says, and unfortunately, he gets it wrong. He then says, Our Lady asked to reveal it in 1960. Again, he's technically right, but how he argues it is going to be wrong. Our Lady didn't say reveal it to the world. She used the Portuguese word aberto, meaning open, meaning the envelope. And she only said the Cardinal Patriarch of Lisbon and the Bishop of Leiria. She never said the Pope was to open it. So it open, not publish.
Uh-huh.
So depending upon how he argues it, he could be wrong. And in the context of this interview, unfortunately, Vigano lends himself to the misinterpretations. Then he continues, but John the 23rd had a communique published on February 8th of that year, etc., etc. No. John the 23rd did not have something published. I have a whole chapter in my book wherein I debunk this absolute trash. It's trash. Vigano and others who have said this before him, they're wrong. The Vatican communique, as I said, this alleged Vatican communique was not issued from the Vatican. The Vatican actually had nothing to do with it. It was an anonymous reporter working for United Press International, and he's simply reporting rumors that he's hearing around the Vatican. Like I said, I have a whole chapter about this in my book. It's from the Vatican in the sense of this guy, was getting the Vaticanese, he's talking to, anonymous persons at the Vatican, but they're all giving like personal opinions, and there's contradictions in this document. So but it wasn't like something that the Pope had signed off on. That's not true. Vigano was wrong. He's parroting bad information. And then he gives a quotation from it. And then he continues. He says, with this distance from the message of the Queen of Heaven, a cover-up operation was started. That is slanderous. That's slanderous. First of all, we're talking about John the 23rd, a canonized saint of the church. People may not like the fact that he's canonized, but the fact of the matter is he is canonized. It's Pope St. John the 23rd. Vigano just calumniated him. He committed an offense against a saint. And we know this. We know this because how I could say that cover-up operation? No, it wasn't a cover-up at all. That's so wrong. And here's why it's wrong. Because they don't have a second text with words of the Virgin, right? They don't have that interprets it. They have this text that describes these people, including the Pope, going up to this mountain, right?
Okay, yeah.
Well, what the heck does that mean? Cardinal Ratzinger himself, during that press conference, during the Q&A, he answered this very question. He said, certainly we've paid a price for all these years of not releasing it. But he says, and I paraphrase, it would have been irresponsible for us to release this text without an interpretation. He says this. He said, and back then they had no idea what it meant. He says this, and you can read it. You can read his own words, Italian to English, both of them are in my book. And he says this. So either you're going to call Ratzinger a liar too, because Ratzinger said these things back then, 19, 20 years ago, and so no, this isn't a cover-up. This isn't a cover-up. That is calumny. So then he goes. Then not only does he sit there and give this calumny, Vigano then turns around and says what he thinks was the reason for it. He says, quote, evidently because the content of the message would have revealed the terrible conspiracy against the Church of Christ by its enemies. No. All right, the best way I could describe it is this. Think about with the present situation with COVID-19, okay? You have all of these visionaries allegedly popping up saying all kinds of crazy things, right? Can you imagine what it would? Father Stanley Yaki, a very popular and well-respected physicist from Hungary, or a scientist from Hungary, had said if he had published this back then, it would have been putting a target on his back, because all these people would have sat there and said, these crazy people would have jumped up and said, "Ha, look, God has appointed me to fulfill the third part of Secret Fathom. I'm going to shoot the Pope myself." Crazy people would have come out of the woodworks, was Father Stanley's point. Right. And he's right. We see this happening now. Somebody just today was telling me about people talking about refuges, alleged visionaries talking about refuges, and and we're gonna, the supply chains are gonna go down, and we're not gonna have any food, and I mean, all this stuff. I mean, this is what happens. So you can only imagine. So without an interpretation, Ratzinger was right. Without an interpretation, it would have been irresponsible for the church to publish that text. There you go. So either Vigano wants to call Ratzinger a liar, or we got a problem because, or he has a problem because what Vigano is saying is just absolute nonsense. So then he continues to talk about how a few decades ago it would have been seemed incredible that even Our Lady could be gagged, but in recent years we have also witnessed attempts to censor the gospel itself, which is the word of her divine Son. Nice flowery language there, Your Excellency, but I'm sorry, but you got some issues here. Then he continues on to say, in the year 2000, during the pontificate of John Paul II, Secretary of State Cardinal Sodano presented his version, presento come terzo segreto una sua versione, that is, his version of the third secret, and that's the Italian text. Well, there was a slight mistranslation here. The company that translated this text into English put it as presented, quote, presented as the third secret, a version of the gospel that from some elements appeared clearly incomplete. That actually that was a mistranslation. Yeah, I looked at both the Italian and the Portuguese, and they both said the same thing, that their English translation was wrong. Well, again, Sodano did not present his version. Vigano is wrong. He's wrong here. That was not Sodano's interpretation. Cardinal Bertone already addressed this years ago in his book, L'Ultima Veggente di Fatima. He said, it was the CDF, the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, under Cardinal Ratzinger, that worked out the basic interpretive approach. John Paul II asked Sodano to present it, but it wasn't Sodano's version interpretation. It wasn't Sodano's interpretation. Let me say that for a third time. It wasn't Sodano's interpretation. And that man, for whatever else people may be able to criticize him on, people are wrong to criticize him in this regard. And I know that by defending him in this way, on this one singular point, I get crucified because he's caught up in some other matters of much heavy dispute with regards to the sex abuse scandals. And, be that as it may, that's not my business here. My business is to talk about what happened with Fatima. And insofar as that's concerned, their history is wrong. So if Vigano is saying these things, where is he getting his information from? His time at the Vatican or somebody else? A little further down, what does Bertone start talking about? Antonio Socci. He says Antonio Socci, who carefully investigated the third secret, unmasked this malicious behavior on the part of Cardinal Bertone. On the other hand, it was Cardinal Bertone himself who heavily discredited and censored another alleged revelation over at Civitavecchia, Italy there, whose message perfectly agrees with what she said at Fatima. So now we start to quote his sources. Antonio Socci. Okay, so are you getting your version of the facts, Archbishop Vigano, from Socci? Have you looked at Socci's sources? Have you looked at the sources behind those sources? Because Socci largely takes up Father Gruner's literature as well as the literature from Le Contre Réforme Catholique there in France. He does, to his credit, Socci does do some outside homework. To his credit, I appreciated that. I've read his book, a number of times, and I'm very appreciative that he was able to call out some of the bad stuff as well. But he does ultimately conclude, that he concludes that there is something else, and I don't think that his interpretation was correct. Then, lastly, Archbishop Vigano gets into talking about the question of the consecration of Russia, which was requested by Our Lady in the second part of the secret. This is where I have to express I'm not as competent to discuss that particular end of the story as much as I am the third part of the secret, but I will say this. Sister Lucia is on camera. It's available on YouTube. She is on camera expressly stating that Russia was consecrated, apparently along with the world, because it was the world that was consecrated, but she says Russia was in fact consecrated in 1984. She says this on camera. It's on YouTube. Clearly, some videos even have subtitles. So it's very, very clear. She says this. And she also published a book. It was actually published after her death, but she wrote a book beforehand called Como Vejo el Mensagem, How I See the Message. And she expressly states that the 1984 consecration of the world, and when she said she indicated that it avoided a nuclear war that was going to happen in the future. And she says it. I could pull the book off my shelf. She says it in writing, in print. I own both the Portuguese and the English translation. She said these things. So, there may be some room to argue some things, but so again, I'm not as competent to discuss all the ins and outs of the question of the consecration of Russia. All I can tell you is she's on camera saying some of these things.
The Russia was consecrated.
Yes, along with the world.
Right.
And some people have wondered how that could happen. And I mean, that's another story for another time, of course. But she's on record. But it is what it is. And in the end, I'm very concerned for Archbishop Vigano. I really am. I think that, and I know I could be really in a lot of trouble for this, but I think the good Archbishop, when he came out 2 years ago with his testimonianza, his testimony about the sex abuse cases, and subsequently he went into hiding. I think that was something that he felt as though he needed to do. I don't judge him for that, but now I think that he's done this good thing and he's got a lot of attention, but he keeps talking. And he's already stated, I think it was an interview with Robert Moynihan at Inside the Vatican, he stated that he's taken more time for prayer and reading new material or some new material now. And, I'm concerned for the good Archbishop. I think that he's becoming under the influence of some very negative things, and they're taking advantage of him. And ultimately, it's destroying whatever credibility he had with his original testimony from August of 2018. And if he doesn't correct course, he's going to discredit himself and all like completely. I'm sorry I'd have to say this. This sounds horrible for a layman. I mean, I'm a nobody. I'm just a layman who read this stuff and published a book, And it hurts me to have to say this because I think Vigano is a good man. I really do. I just think that he's not in possession of all the facts. And I don't know if anybody's going to sit there and tell him because he's in hiding. And the people that he's surrounding himself with, a lot of them, are the ones who are feeding him this information. So why would they tell him about my book? And I don't know where he is. You can't just call him up and go, "Hey, Archbishop, hey, we need to talk." You can't do that. I know at least one person who knows Vigano, but I doubt that this information would get to him. I've tried, but I doubt that it would.
Archbishop Vigano, if you are listening to this podcast, in the event that you do, how awesome would it be if you could come onto the show and talk with Kevin? Now, I do, and speaking of that, I have some questions. So you said the what. This is what he said. My question is, to what end? Why? What is he hoping to, or what do you suppose he hopes to achieve by saying these things?
You ask a very good question, and here's how I will answer it. Archbishop Vigano, like a lot of us, and I put myself in this number, we're trying to make sense of the present situation and condition of Holy Mother Church. Again, all human beings by nature desire to know, right? Aristotle, metaphysics. How did we get at this present state of affairs? People are trying to account for this right now. And I think Vigano is one of them. He himself said, 2 years ago, in good conscience, I can't. I only have so many years left. I don't want to go to God with all these things on my conscience, he says. And I don't blame him for that. I don't blame him. I mean, for that desire. We all want a clean conscience before we go to our judgment before Almighty God. And Archbishop Vigano comes across to me as a God-fearing man. But he sees the present condition of the church. He sees that there are questions that are happening now and things that are taking place that he doesn't agree with and that are questionable. And so he's trying to arrive at how did we arrive at this present state of affairs? And so he's been coming across this literature that seems to offer a plausible explanation. In some ways, I think there's some merit to the arguments, as I said earlier and in previous interviews. But it's incomplete. It's not a complete narrative. But he seems to be buying into it because it's like a security blanket. It's offering security and comfort, and it's making some sense. But when you actually go back and you do the history, you do the research, and you look at the foundations of this information, some of it's very questionable. And I just think that Bishop Vigano is motivated by a sincere, maybe God-inspired even desire to do the good. Nobody would fault him for that, much less me.
Sure.
I just think that he's being misinformed, and I would love to talk to him if I could. I really would. If he is hearing this, I have a website. Contact me.
Yeah, and for me, I guess in the event that people was wondering what my thoughts were, I am not a expert by any stretch of the imagination on Fatima, which is why I said that you're my go-to guy. But at the same time, even with the concerns that he has with the condition of the church in the modern world, here's where I take the greatest solace, is in Christ's own words, that the gates of hell will never prevail against the church. And so, whether, to tease a future episode with you on Fire Away Again, whether the infiltration by Taylor Marshall has a lot of merit, no merit, some merit, or moderate amount of merit to it, whatever the case is, the church is a pilgrim church. It is the church militant, which means that we have an enemy in front of us that we must always confront, which for all intents and purposes, for speaking as a military man, it's an occupational hazard. Sometimes you're going to fall. Sometimes you're going to get hurt, and it just is what it is. And so for, whether or not the church is in some sort of peril, there has not ever been a time in the church where we have not faced adversity of one sort or another. And so there's no, for me, there's no cause for, to throw up your hands in some sort of, emergency that we've never, ever faced, because I take my solace in that. But, believe it or not, we've come to the part of the show for save rounds and parting shots. So if there was one thing and just one thing that you wanted our listeners to take away from this show, what would it be?
Pay attention to Our Lady's requests. The 5 first Saturday devotions, praying the rosary, making sacrifices for sinners. That is the most important part. Living the commandments of God. That's why have faith. And it's very hard. I get that in the midst of this, of our trying times. We have to have faith, though, because otherwise we allow the evil one room to work, and it destroys that peace of heart, which is part of the purity of heart that is necessary to see God. And I'm sure nobody wants to jeopardize their eternal salvation through anger. So to pray and be at peace. Esta in paz, be in peace. And so our faith, humility, and obedience is being tried and tested. But for those of us for those who wish to be Our Lady's true children, truly Our Lady's children, have that faith and trust in God and in His providence, and that we have a good mother keeping us in her mantle.
Right on, brother. And with that, this is our music letting us know that we're out of time for this week's episode, brought to you by Catholic Ammo. Many thanks to all who are listening, and special thanks to our guest, Kevin Symonds. Thank you so much for your time. I hope you'll join us again. Like I said, maybe even do a review on Dr. Taylor Marshall's book, Infiltration. For a quick recap on this episode, 61, we covered so much. All I can say is, if you want to learn about Fatima, re-listen to this episode. If you want to learn the significance of it, re-listen to this episode. But before we finish, let's go ahead and bow our heads in a closing prayer. And Kevin, if you will.
In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Saint Michael, the Archangel, defend us in battle. Be our safeguard against the wickedness and snares of the devil. May God rebuke him, we humbly pray. Be thou, O Prince of the heavenly host, with the power of God, thrust into hell Satan and all the evil spirits who prowl about the world, seeking the ruin of souls. Amen. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen. For more thought-provoking, soul-enriching content, follow me on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter under @CatholicAmmo. Again, that's @CatholicAmmo. And be sure to check out more Fire Away at WCATradio.com/Fire Away. This is your host, Carlos Bersabe. Until next Friday, or whatever day I can squeeze an episode in, keep mission-focused and stay locked, loaded, and ready.
Failure is not an option.
Bye-bye, boys.
Have fun storming the castle.
Think it'll work?
It would take a miracle.
Goodbye.
Thank you for listening to a production of WCAT Radio. Please join us in our mission of evangelization. And don't forget, love lifts up when knowledge takes flight.